Hi, this is Dan, and this is my video about the lost Hartford, Connecticut department store called Wise Smith and Company, which first opened in 1897. By the middle of the 20th century, the store had grown to occupy much of the block north of Pratt Street on the west side of Main Street. Wise Smith ceased operations in the 1950s, so it did not have the longevity of its rivals G. Fox or Sage Allen, which also started in the 19th century but survived to the 1990s. In this video, I'll talk about the older buildings that Wise Smith replaced and the changes its building at 915 Main Street went through as it was steadily enlarged. After Wise Smith closed, its former building became a branch of Korvette's discount department stores, which in turn closed down in 1971. 915 Main Street was later known as the American Airlines Building, and today contains apartments and businesses. Before I start, I just want to say if you enjoy this video, please hit the like button. You can also leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. And if you know someone who might enjoy my videos, please let them know as well. I'm getting closer to 1,000 subscribers, so any help you can give would be greatly appreciated. Let's get started. This is a modern photo of the west side of Main Street north of Pratt Street. And this is an illustration of the same area during the inaugural parade of Connecticut Governor Charles Roberts Ingersoll in 1873. Christ Church Cathedral is the only building in this view that still exists today. As I mentioned in my video about Sage Allen Department Store, the building at the northwest corner of Pratt and Main Streets was called the Janes Building. It was built in 1845 and was long the home of Talcott and Post's dry goods store. Sage Allen and Company was located here from when it first opened in 1889 until it moved into a new building across the street in 1898. In the middle of the block, between Pratt and Church Streets, was another church building. It was built in the 1830s as the Free Church, later called the Fourth Congregational Church. In 1850, the congregation erected a new church further up Main Street, and the old building was refitted to become a public hall called Melodeon Hall, which had retail shops in the front. This is the site where the first Wise Smith building would be erected in 1897. Here is a section of the bird's eye view of Hartford of 1877 that shows the same block with Melodeon Hall highlighted. This is a photograph taken in the aftermath of the blizzard of 1888. Melodeon Hall is on the left with its various storefronts. Just north of that were two other commercial and office structures. Over 20 years before, a pair of gambrel-roofed buildings had occupied the area, as shown in the picture on the right. In 1866, an Italianate-style mansard-roofed commercial structure called the Roberts Block was erected just north of Melodeon Hall by a Mr. W. W. Roberts. The building also included a Masonic hall. Roberts then erected a theater called Roberts Opera House just behind his Main Street building. It is shown on the right in a section from the 1885 Sanborn Atlas of Hartford. The main entrance from Main Street was by way of a passage that ran through the center of the Roberts Block. The theater could also be reached by way of alleys, one on the south from Pratt Street and one on the north from Church Street, which was located just behind Christ Church. When it opened in January of 1869, Roberts Opera House was considered to be Hartford's first modern playhouse. Topped by a dome that had a diameter of 27 feet, it was the city's first theater to have a balcony, gallery, orchestra, and parquet. For many years, Roberts was Hartford's premier theater for stage shows, lectures, and musical performances. New management took over in 1886, and it became Jacobs and Proctor's Opera House. 10 years later, it was purchased by H. Jennings and Colonel C.M. Graves and renamed the Hartford Opera House. They hoped to operate it as a rival to the newly opened Parsons Theater, which by then had replaced the old Roberts as the city's grandest theater. The last building on the block before Christ Church was Miller's Building, completed in 1875 for William M. Miller's dry goods store. So that's the area as of 1888. Now I'll talk about the growth of Wise, Smith & Company, a store that would soon own this entire area south of Christ Church, starting, as I said, with the Melodeon Building. The moving force behind the company was Isidore Wise. Born in Hartford in 1865, Wise attended the Old North School, later called the Henry Barnard School. But he left school at the age of 11 to become a cash boy at Stern and Mendelbaum's dry goods store at the corner of Main and Temple Streets. His starting salary was $2 a week, but by the end of his first year it was doubled to $4 a week. He befriended 2 other young men, and they all vowed to save enough money to go into business together. After a number of years, they opened their own store, I. Wise & Company, at the corner of Main and Kinsley Streets in 1886. Wise and his 2 partners expanded in 1890 by buying out the Clark dry goods store located in the Cheney Building on Main Street. They reopened the store under their own name, I. Wise & Company, also known as the Boston Store. At the time, there was a very successful dry goods store also located in the Cheney Building called the Beehive. In the years before he sold to Wise and his partners, Mr. Clark's business had been falling off, and he had advised Wise not to purchase his store because Clark thought that if a wealthy merchant such as himself had failed to compete against the Beehive, he didn't see how the young Wise could do so. Wise responded, "I am 21 years and old enough to make my own decisions." Clark finally agreed to sell, and within 2 weeks, Wise and his partners had made back all of their capital. They would continue to thrive, and after 8 years in the Cheney Building, the business required more space. They decided to erect their own building across the street on the site of Melodeon Hall. The firm would also take on a new name, Wise, Smith & Company, as they had recently taken on a new partner, Robert Smith, a New York merchant and cloak manufacturer. Smith would eventually leave the partnership in 1903, and various other partners would come and go, but the name Wise, Smith & Company would continue. The new Wise, Smith & Company building, designed by Buckman and Diesler of New York, would have 6 floors and a basement. There was a lot of risk involved in this. At the time, the west side of Main Street was considered to be less fashionable than the east side. Also, at that time, retail stores were mostly located on ground floors of buildings. Some customers were even still suspicious of the newfangled invention of elevators. Even when a company like Say Jallin erected its building on Main Street in 1898, it only occupied the ground floor and basement. It would take many years before Say Jallin would expand into the entire building. Another store that opened around the same time and did occupy a large 6-story building was George O. Sawyer's Dry Goods Company at the corner of Main and Asylum. But that store went bankrupt after just over 2 years in business. Wise Smith would eventually acquire the defunct company's stock of goods for itself. Pouring rain did not deter a large crowd of shoppers who gathered under umbrellas for Wise, Smith & Company's grand opening on the evening of November 2nd, 1897. The interior was lavishly decorated. The first floor had a 50-foot-high rotunda illuminated by electric lights. The store's 2 wrought iron elevators whisked guests to floors containing clothing, furniture, household goods, carpets, rugs, and curtains. There was a basement restaurant, and on the first floor was a soda fountain right next to the candy department. One of the store's mottos was "From Maker to Wearer," so within the building, garments and hats were made to order. There was also upholstering and the manufacture of mattresses, carpets, and shades. As a souvenir, each visitor to the opening received a picture of the USS Hartford, flagship of Admiral Farragut during the Civil War. The store would go through numerous expansions in the coming decades. The first came in 1899, just 2 years after the new building opened, when an older building on Pratt Street, once used by the Hartford Courant newspaper, was taken over for the store's manufacturing operations. Now, I mentioned earlier that in 1900, Wise Smith acquired the entire stock of the bankrupt Sawyer Dry Goods Company. When that happened, crowds thronged the Wise Smith store as the Sawyer goods were brought over and put on sale. The Courant reported on February 12, 1900, quote, "The suddenness with which this stock was purchased and placed on sale by Wise Smith & Company is the talk of the town. It is only equaled by the completeness of the transfer, not only of the stock, but the entire clientage of the Sawyer store." A little incident which took place Saturday forcibly illustrates this fact. A lady came into the Wise Smith & Company's new store after the sale of the Sawyer stock was underway in considerable anxiety over a hat that she had purchased, and left to be remodeled at the Sawyer store the day before, less than an hour before the store was closed. The hat was to be sent out COD, and she feared she would not get it. She was assured that it would be all right and directed to the millinery department on the second floor. There she found not only her own hat and the alterations being made upon it, but the clerk who had sold it to her in the Sawyer store the day before. The hat was sent to her safely on the afternoon delivery that very day. In truth, it took only 1 day to establish the fact, and establish it most thoroughly, that everything in the Sawyer store was at the new store. As one customer remarked, "If you saw anything at the Sawyer store you liked, you can buy it now at Wise Smith & Company's at about half the price." Unquote. The next major physical expansion of the store came in 1901, when Wise Smith leased the building just to the north, the Roberts Block, which I talked about earlier. The walls on each floor of Wise Smith were cut through to extend the store into the Roberts Building. The Hartford Opera House in the rear of the Roberts Building was left undisturbed, but a new entrance was created for it. The old entrance went through the center of the Roberts Building to the Opera House. Wise desired a continuous storefront, so the entrance was moved further north on the building's facade. In this photograph, workers are preparing the new entrance to the Opera House on the right. The rest of the ground floor would be devoted to Wise Smith & Company. The picture on the left shows the new entrance to the Opera House, which by that time was being operated by the heirs of Jennings and Graves under the name the Hartford Theater. Also in 1901, Wise Smith started to use a building to its rear called the Hammersley Block for storage and as a grocery warehouse connected by an elevated bridge to Wise Smith's new grocery department in the Roberts Building. Besides groceries, the Roberts Block would also contain expanded millinery and shoe departments and a new wallpaper, paint, and glass department. Isidore Wise claimed that when the expansion into the Roberts Building was complete, his company would be the largest department store in New England outside Boston. As the Hartford Courant reported on November 3, 1909, quote, "Wise Smith & Company have helped greatly in building up the suburban trade of the city, until now Hartford is a very considerable trading center, not only for the surrounding towns, but also for some of the cities of considerable size, where there is neither the keen competition nor the reducing of prices to be found at our great stores. They also deserve credit for their high aspirations in their business. Each department, as it has been opened, has been in reality a complete store in its line. For instance, the men's department, occupying the main floor of the Roberts Building, offers complete furnishings for men, and the same is true of the departments devoted to women's outer garments, where is to be found a very complete line of suits, coats, furs, etc., for women, misses, and children. Another very complete department is that devoted to furniture, which occupies an entire floor in the store. The restaurant on the top floor, light, roomy, and offering a delightful view, is a favorite spot with out-of-town as well as Hartford people who have got into the habit of dropping in for lunch or a cup of tea." Unquote. In 1907, Wise Smith finally bought the Roberts Building and the Opera House behind it. As I said, the Hartford Theater continued to be operated by the Jennings and Graves Company. They had a 15-year lease arranged with the previous property owner. The lease included a bar and pool room on the first floor under the theater. Wise wanted to eject the Opera House and take over the building for his own business. In 1909, he tried to eject Jennings and Graves for violating various terms of their lease. At issue was an unauthorized subletting of the theater, the placing of electric signs on the front of the building, and reports that minors were allowed in the pool room. After extensive court proceedings, Wise, Smith & Company ended up dropping the suit, and the theater continued in operation. However, an arrangement was soon reached for Wise Smith to expand its store into the bar and pool room space under the theater and the basement below that. The store was also expanding in other directions. This photograph is a view southward down Main Street in 1908. It shows the buildings on the west side of the street south of Christ Church. First is the Miller Building, which I mentioned earlier in the video. It was acquired by Wise Smith & Company in 1900. Next is the Wise Smith store, consisting of the Roberts Building and the store's original 1897 building. In 1910, the store acquired the property just to its south, a 4-story brick structure known as the Corning Building, named for John B. Corning, who had built it many years before for his own dry goods business. It was in his memory that his son, John J. Corning, would give the Corning Fountain in Bushnell Park. Wise, Smith & Company planned to use its newly acquired property for a significant expansion. On the left is a picture of the store as it existed in 1912. On the right is the planned expansion of that year, designed by the Hartford architect Isaac A. Allen, Jr. The original 6-story structure of 1897 would be raised to 9 stories. The building would also be expanded to the south into the space once occupied by the Corning Building. On the left is a picture of the expanded building under construction, and on the right is a postcard showing the completed building, which opened in October of 1912. As the Hartford Courant described it on October 12, 1912, quote, "The new and enlarged structure is a distinct feature of the capital city. Wise, Smith & Company are now the largest and most completely equipped department store in any city of the size of Hartford in the United States. Each of the 9 floors and basement, exclusive of the 2-story addition above the roof, has 15,000 square feet of floor space, making a grand total of 150,000 square feet in this new building. The building is over 146 feet from the street level and covers property that has been acquired on each side of the main site. But the store has grown so steadily and so remarkably that lateral additions have not been sufficient, and it has been found necessary to raise the structure as well as to lengthen and deepen it. The front is composed of 3 materials. The columns are of light gray pressed brick with caps and bases of Indiana limestone, and panels and mullions of copper. The whole front is refined and trimmed so as to present a uniform appearance. Between the first and second floors is a sheet metal sign containing the name of the company, and another of Indiana limestone at the level of the 7th floor. The latter sign runs the length of the building and is at the level where the old cornice used to be." Unquote. Wise, Smith & Company had a continuous storefront that stretched almost across 2 buildings, but the entrance to the Hartford Theater still occupied part of the Roberts Building facade. As Roberts Opera House, this theater had once been the finest in the state, and Sarah Bernhard, Edwin Booth, Jenny Lind, and Buffalo Bill had all performed here. In later years, the Hartford Theater had become a vaudeville and motion picture house, and was even leased by the theater impresario Sylvester Z. Poli from 1910 to 1914. But business was bad and there were numerous competitors. The theater opened its doors for the last time on July 22, 1917. The very next day, workmen arrived to remodel the front and to transform the theater into an extension of Wise Smith and Company. This map, which appeared in the Hartford Courant on June 3, 1917, displayed the various properties acquired by Wise Smith by that time. They were located in an area bounded on the east at the bottom of the map by Main Street and between Church Street to the north and Pratt Street to the south. Behind the store's Main Street building was the Hammersley property. You may recall I mentioned that an earlier building on this property had been used by Wise Smith as a grocery warehouse. That particular building had burned down in a fire in 1905, and the Hammersley estate had replaced it with a structure that extended to Pratt Street. Wise Smith acquired the building in 1917. The year before that, the store had also acquired another lot on Pratt Street from the estate of James J. Goodwin. Located here for many years was an old house that had long been used for businesses. Just west of the house was the Unity Building, built in 1891, which still survives today, and behind the Unity Building was the Unity Church, later demolished. Both of these buildings were also acquired by Wise Smith in 1917. These acquisitions made Isidore Wise the largest property holder in downtown at the time. Wise soon built an extension of his 9-story store on the rear portion of the Goodwin property. But he also wanted to preserve the character of Pratt Street as a place of smaller specialty shops, a trend that more recent developers have also followed. Wise hired Isaac A. Allen, Jr. to design a new 2-story building on the part of the Goodwin property that fronted along Pratt Street where the house had stood. The new building was completed in 1918. Wise would then move on to developing the Hammersley property. This is a photograph of the north side of Pratt Street circa 1950. It shows the building erected on the Goodwin property in 1918. The front part of the building, now numbered 50 to 54 Pratt Street, survives today as part of a later development. Just to the east, at 44 Pratt Street, is another 2-story building also designed by Isaac A. Allen, Jr. Wise erected it on the Hammersley property in 1922 to connect it with his store on Main Street. His final construction on Pratt Street was the building at numbers 40 to 42, built in 1924-5, and Wise was still not done with Pratt Street real estate. In 1922, he had acquired the building with the current address of 80 Pratt Street, and in 1924 he acquired the Jerome E. Sage building at 88 Pratt Street. So by the mid-1920s, he owned a continuous section that took up most of the north side of Pratt Street. In 1921, Wise Smith was incorporated with Isidore Wise serving as president. The following year, the company celebrated its 25th anniversary. The store was many times the size it had been back in 1897. To commemorate the occasion, the employees of Wise Smith & Company presented Isidore Wise with a bronze tablet. The final stage in the development of Wise Smith's physical space would come in 1929. The old Roberts building was finally demolished, and a new 9-story structure erected in its place, designed by Dennison and Herons of New York. It was in a style described by the Hartford Courant as the American vertical style and featured Art Deco decoration. But this was just the first phase of the operation. The next step was to remodel the older section of the store to match the new addition, thus creating a continuous facade along Main Street. The entire project took about a year and was completed in April of 1930. Sadly, in November of that year, the Miller Building, which I mentioned was built in 1875, was destroyed in a fire. It was quickly replaced by a new building that opened the following year with a Woolworths store. This building would go through a radical change in 1963 when it was remodeled for the Outlet Millinery and Apparel Company. On the left is a photo of the building as it looks today. So now I'll talk about the final years of Wise Smith & Company. In 1948, Wise Smith affiliated with City Stores Company of New York. The 83-year-old Isidore Wise relinquished direction of the store to a new president who operated it under the old name Wise Smith on behalf of City Stores. There was a $500,000 modernization program to revitalize the establishment, but in May of 1954 the store finally closed and control of the property was returned to Isidore Wise. The building would remain vacant for the next 3 years. On January 25, 1956, Isidore Wise passed away at the age of 90 at his Hartford home, which still stands today on Prospect Avenue. Starting out as a cash boy paid $2 a week, he came to be the city's largest taxpayer and owned more real estate on Main Street than any other individual. He served on the city's Common Council and on the Police Commission. His grandfather had been one of Hartford's first uniformed police officers. He also served as president of the Board of Park Commissioners. A leader of Hartford's Jewish community, he was president of Congregation Beth Israel for 37 years. The Wise Smith building remained vacant until December of 1957, when, after another expensive round of modernizing, the New York chain of discount department stores E.J. Korvette opened in the building. It was Korvette's first store in New England. In the history of American retail, Korvettes and similar chains like Caldor displaced the earlier five and dime stores and preceded the later emergence of larger retail superstores like Walmart. The modernization of the building cost $3 million. There was a total interior remodeling, with floors retiled and a new lighting system and escalators. The project also involved major construction work, such as redesigning and strengthening the building's steel structural supports, constructing a new entrance on Pratt Street, and building a shipping and receiving dock in the rear where remnants of the old Roberts Opera House still stood, and for the first time the building would be air-conditioned. In 1961, the company erected a $500,000 three-level ramp garage behind the building. Korvette's closed its Hartford store in 1971, and for several years the future of the building was uncertain. In 1976, the building underwent a major facelift, being encased in brick to become American Airlines' new East Coast Reservation Center. Much of the building's original Art Deco decoration would be removed or covered over. With the start of the 21st century, American Airlines vacated the building, numbered 915 Main Street, which was eventually remodeled into apartments. During renovation work on the facade during this conversion in 2006, some architectural details between the windows were discovered, hiding underneath aluminum siding. These were now revealed to the city again after 3 decades. While much has been lost, the building at least does survive today. Like the growth of Sage Allen department store across the street, Wise Smith & Company started at the end of the 19th century with a single building in the midst of a block, and over a 30-year period of rapid expansion grew to acquire numerous neighboring properties. It occupied these, remodeled, and built new structures on the property, which it occupied, remodeled, and rebuilt to become a much larger store. Unlike its major rivals, Sage Allen and G. Fox, Wise Smith went out of business in the 50s, after less than 50 years in existence, and its successor, Korvette's, occupied the building for less than 15 years, closing in 1971. This meant that 915 Main Street's days as a department store ended about 2 decades before Sage Allen and G. Fox would finally close. It was still quite a record, so the next time you pass by this building, take a moment to recall the legacy of Isidore Wise, one of Hartford's greatest merchants.